The Big Ten has released its schedule for the next 5 years, and there are some head scratchers and some things that make a whole lot of sense. When you take a look at the schools that are going to be joining the Big Ten, Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA, are there a ton of real natural rivals for them? No, not especially. There are some interspersed throughout themselves, yes. Makes sense for Oregon and Washington to play every year. Makes USC and UCLA makes sense for them to play every year. That tracks, just like it makes sense for Minnesota and Wisconsin to play every year. That doesn't take a science rocket to figure out that makes a lot of sense. But how should the four new schools be integrated into the new Big Ten schedules? It's really interesting the way that they did it. And before we dive into the way that the Big Ten is doing all this, I want to take a look at the protected rivals that the Big Ten has come up with, the list of protected rivals. And I want to go through what is on the list, what shouldn't be on the list, and what should be on the list. When you look at what is on the list, Illinois Northwestern, Illinois Purdue, Indiana Purdue, Iowa Minnesota, Iowa Nebraska, Iowa Wisconsin. Then Maryland Rutgers, Michigan Michigan State, Michigan Ohio State, Minnesota Wisconsin, Oregon Washington, USC UCLA. Like, I think the vast majority of those make sense. Should Illinois play Northwestern every year? Yes, absolutely. Indiana and Purdue makes a ton of sense. Michigan, Michigan State, those schools hate each other. Flat out hate each other. Michigan and Ohio State respect each other, and it's going to be the highest rated game in TV every single year. Makes sense to play every year. Minnesota, Wisconsin, Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA. They all make a ton of sense. Then there are some on the protected rivals list that make you go like, is it imperative that Illinois play Purdue every year? I don't think so. I mean, I don't think that it's okay. If you want to have a rivalry, I guess, like, okay, that's fine. You want to say that that's a rivalry, and maybe it is. Maybe I'm undercutting it, not giving it the credit that it deserves. But it's not. Compared to some of the other rivalries on the list, is Illinois Purdue so important that it has to be protected? I don't know. And then I want to know how much weight Iowa has at the Big Ten office. Like, how big of a thing they swanging in meetings that they get three protected rivals and Penn State has none. Ohio State has one, but Iowa has three. USC, UCLA, Oregon, Washington each have one. Iowa has three. Illinois has two. Something doesn't track there where Iowa, Minnesota, Iowa, Nebraska, Iowa, Wisconsin. Now, part of that, I think, is one, Wisconsin would only have one other rival in Minnesota if they didn't have Iowa, Wisconsin. And then Minnesota, Wisconsin, Nebraska wouldn't have so to me it makes like Iowa Nebraska has turned into a nice fun little rivalry where they're playing that thing on Black Friday in the afternoon. I think it's fun and it's good for the Big Ten. Is Iowa Wisconsin so imperative? Iowa Minnesota? If anything, to me, Minnesota Michigan should be on the list as much as Minnesota Iowa should be on the list. How in the hell does Iowa get three protected games every year? One, from just a schedule standpoint, it works out to them because, let's be honest, Minnesota's not that great every year. Nebraska traditionally I guess not traditionally, Nebraska in the last, 15 years has not been, hell, it's 20 years at this point, has not been great. Wisconsin's pretty good. But instead of seeing a conference schedule that could see them play Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State, USC, Oregon, Washington, they get to play Minnesota every year and get to play Wisconsin every year and Nebraska every year. And truthfully, I don't care all that much about fairness in schedules. Like the idea that like 1 year, well, it's not fair because Rutgers plays Maryland, Illinois, Minnesota, and Purdue 1 year, while in the same year Michigan plays Ohio State, Washington, Wisconsin, Michigan State, Nebraska, and USC. I don't necessarily care because I think it's going to work itself out. Either on the field, it's going to work itself out on the field. The teams that are supposed to be playing for the conference championship are going to be playing for the conference championships. But when you look at the protected rivals, it makes a lot of sense for the 4 new schools coming into the Big Ten, Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA, to be paired with not just themselves, but also 4 of the kind of traditional powers. Like the newbies and the traditional powers should be paired up too. So they're playing somebody big every year that makes sense for TV. We can pretend as if those 4 schools are joining the Big Ten because their academics are so great and the presidents it's for TV. It's so these schools can make more money. And if that's the case, if you're going to sell yourself and sell your soul to TV, how you don't then go, okay, 4 of you are going to play 4 of our traditional powers every year to guarantee that we've got a big game every week to appease NBC, CBS, and Fox. Because I'm here to tell you that a Michigan-Washington game is not going to air on Big Ten Network. Ohio State, USC, UCLA, Penn State, or Oregon, Nebraska is not going to air on Peacock or on the Big Ten Network. Those games are going to be in prime time on NBC. They're going to be on CBS. They're going to be on Fox at the big noon kickoff. I just think it's a missed opportunity for the Big Ten of if you're going to say, hey, the most important thing for us going forward is making the college football, and this probably isn't the order, actually, making the college football playoff, having a really competitive conference, having the best and biggest brands we can have, and making sure our TV partners are really happy. How you don't say the 4 of you that are coming into the Big Ten are going to be paired with our 4 biggest brands that already exist. And you could argue what those 4 brands are. You could argue that Nebraska is not bigger than Wisconsin or Iowa. I don't think you can argue Iowa is bigger than Penn State. Right now, you have Ohio State and Michigan as your 2 marquee brands. You are now adding USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington. You can argue about the hierarchy of where those 4 should come in. I think USC is obviously number 1. But for competitive purposes, to ingratiate those schools into your conference, because the longer that you have a Washington schedule that features Indiana, Rutgers, Northwestern, the longer it's going to take to feel like they are a real, true Big Ten member. If Washington is going to play Michigan, Michigan State, Penn State, Ohio State, Iowa, Nebraska, they're going to feel like a Big Ten member much quicker than USC playing Maryland, Minnesota, Rutgers. It just doesn't. And I realize that you don't want to create a hierarchy inside your own conference or admit that there's a hierarchy inside your own conference. But is Maryland, Rutgers a game that needs protecting? No. But not giving either one of them a game really highlights the fact of where you stand inside the conference. And is that a fun little dance to do? No, not especially. But you got to make everybody feel like they're just as important as Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Nebraska, Iowa, and Wisconsin, right? I've mentioned before that there are very clear hierarchies inside college football conferences. And I don't know that there's as wide of a gap in many conferences as there is in the Big Ten. Because there are, at least in football, your Purdue, Indiana, Rutgers, Illinois, Northwestern, Minnesota, and then Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State, Penn State, Iowa, Nebraska, Wisconsin. And then you throw in a lot more halves with USC, Oregon, Washington, UCLA. It's not great. It's not a great pairing. It's not a great setup, but they're doing the best they can. But when you look at the games, how Illinois has 2 games, Purdue has 2 games, Iowa has 3 games, Ohio State has 1 protected game. Penn State has 0 protected games. It's not even a fairness thing. It's a like, well, wait a second. How important is Iowa in the Big Ten landscape? How important is Iowa to the Big Ten TV partners? Apparently, it's bigger and better than I think, because the fact that they got 3, and the fact, did nobody inside that meeting go like, well, wait just a damn minute? How does Penn State not say, you're going to tell me that Iowa gets 3 and we get none? Because if you look at Penn State's schedule for a couple of years, in 2024, they get USC, Wisconsin on the road, Ohio State, UCLA, Washington at home. Meanwhile, Iowa plays Maryland, Northwestern, Minnesota. It's just not, like I said, I don't care a whole lot about fairness or equity in the schedules, because if you are there's just not going to be a whole lot of scenarios where somebody could have been 11-1 with somebody else's schedule, but because theirs was just so much more loaded up, they finished 6-6. Like, it's just not, that's just generally not how it works. But when you look at the schedule and go, or I guess look at the list of protected rivals, I think there's a missed opportunity to bring Oregon, Washington, UCLA, USC into the conference and make it really big, one, for those new fan bases, because you can't tell me that UCLA wouldn't be just pumped to see a schedule of Michigan, USC, Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, etc. come to the Rose Bowl than Maryland, Minnesota, Illinois, Purdue. It's just not like there are games that move the needle and games that don't. And if you're going to sell your soul to the TV devil, you might as well make sure that you get as many games that move the needle as possible. Because you got a lot of mouths to feed now with Fox, CBS, NBC, Big Ten Network, Peacock. Got to figure it all out every week. And there's going to be a song and dance here of like, we're going to schedule Maryland or we're going to schedule Northwestern Indiana the same week that we schedule Michigan State. So we know that there's a game here that's going to be like, there's going to be Big Ten Network games that we know, like, this is going to be on Big Ten Network. And then, like, is Illinois Purdue ever going to be a big noon kickoff? Probably not. Is it ever going to be a CBS game or a Big Ten Saturday night game? No, probably not. That game is, and I don't know if that's the measuring stick of like, if you go through these protected rivals and say, all right, Maryland Rutgers, is it ever going to be a national TV game where somebody is clamoring that they want to have that show, that game on their network? No, probably not. Well, then sorry. Is Iowa, Minnesota ever a game that NBC says, to hell with everything else this week, we need to have Iowa, Minnesota on our network? Probably not. No, get it out of here. I just think that there's a way to do it, and I don't know if there's a great way to do it. The way it's put together now sounds pretty good. Is that, you have a certain amount of protected rivals. Penn State has none. Just to keep driving that home. Penn State has none. And then they'll go through and they'll play every institution. They're still playing 9 conference games per year, and they're going to play everybody at least once at home and once away in a certain time frame. And then you're not going to play anybody outside of your protected rival more than 3 times in a 5-year period, which I think kind of stinks. Like, it's okay, because from a Indiana perspective, do they want to play Oregon, Washington, UCLA, and USC more than 3 times in 5 years? Yeah, probably. Does Northwestern want USC, UCLA, Oregon, Washington, Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State coming more than once every 5 years? Yeah, they do. But that's the way the cookie crumbles. 18 is not a great number for a college football conference when you're playing 9 games. Like, in theory it is, but then you got to account for Ohio State's going to play Michigan every year. Michigan is going to play Michigan State every year. So it's just kind of a sloppy arrangement where, and I don't know if there's a perfect way to go about it. As certain as I am that there are some schools that are like, yeah, I want this program coming to my stadium once every other year. Those same programs that are being used as ticket fillers are saying like, hey, do we really need to play at Northwestern? Do we got to play at Purdue? Do we got to play at Illinois? That's the way it shook out. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out over the course of the coming years and if there's any tweaks to that. If they say, you know what, USC and Michigan has really developed into a great rivalry, we're putting it on the list. I don't know what the process is for putting something on the list. I don't know if in 4 years Ohio State can say, like, hey, Big Ten office, we really love playing Oregon and Oregon really loves playing us. Because that would be the goal, right? Is that those schools jump into the conference so quickly that they like, hey, I want to play Penn State every year. I want to play Wisconsin every year. I don't know what that path looks like, but I wonder just how easy or how difficult it is to add to that list of the protected rivals. That'll do it for today's edition of the Daily Huddle. Thanks for making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. We certainly appreciate it. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the great college football content from us here at Saturday Glory. If you're listening on the podcast, drop a 5-star review, and we'll read them here on the show. We'll catch you tomorrow. We'll catch you Sunday for a full recap of the latest college football week. Really looking forward to it. Got the Sunday Stiff Arm Trophy update as well coming for you on Sunday here on the Daily Huddle from Saturday Glory.